9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio.
Hello, Deep State listeners. Welcome to another episode of We're All Gonna Die Radio. I'm your host, John Wolfstall. I'd like to point out that when I named this podcast, We're All Gonna Die, I didn't realize it's true and maybe truer than we think, or at least may come faster than we think. But I know a lot of people listening to this broadcast have probably been wondering how fast the end is going to come. And not just the Yankee fans. Because for those of us that are Yankee fans, we welcome the end at this point because it was pretty excruciating. And to show you how much I love our guest today, I trust him not to basically grind salt in my Yankee wounds more than a minute or two. But I'm thrilled to welcome back my friend and colleague Joe Cirincione for today's podcast. Joe, hi.
Hi, John. Thank you for having me. Hey, man, at least you got to the game. You got to the series, you know?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I don't know if you saw the Netflix show, The Comeback. It's all about the 2004 series. I know, but it helps you appreciate the pain that teams go through, almost making it all the way and then failing. And this is true. I didn't appreciate the pain the Yankee fans have felt until I saw that, until I saw how they would beat the Red Sox in the ALCS, and then go on to lose World Series after World Series, including, unfortunately, this year's.
So when I said I trusted Joe not to grind salt in the wounds, it reminds me of the old adage, trust but verify. Like I need a mute button because
That was sympathetic. I was empathizing with you.
You'd be not surprised. I think you'd probably be pleased with how many people have sent me links to The Comeback. And like, oh, John, this is for you, and you should really, So yes, I appreciate it. It is at the long list of things I will not be watching. But it does remind me of the Ted Lasso meme, which is it's the hope that kills you. And in the middle of game 5, the Yankees were like, oh yeah, we're going to roll. And on Monday of last week, a lot of Democrats thought it's the hope, right? Iowa looks good. We're going to be good. And now we're recognizing what this country has chosen, not by some slim margin, but that this country on an electoral basis has overwhelmingly chosen. And we're going to try to get beyond just the shock and being appalled to talk about this particular aspect because quite frankly, we all had 4 years of being shocked and appalled, and it did nothing. I think we need to really work hard to get beyond our own personal, emotional response and really look at what's actually going to happen under this administration. Because you wrote a piece for the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, and I think you put it very well, which is they are doing exactly what they said they were going to do. The appointments that we're seeing so far give us every indication that that's exactly what they plan to implement, and we should begin to anticipate what those are. And so really today what I wanted to talk about is a couple of things. But first of all, do you have any words for us to really sort of frame how you're viewing this incoming administration and what we're likely to see starting January 20th in the world of nuclear weapons and nuclear security?
Yeah. One of the most popular shows on television right now is The Penguin, an HBO show about the Batman villain. And it tells the story of a small-time criminal thug who rises to be the czar of the gangs in Gotham City and then is elected mayor of Gotham City. You see where I'm going with this.
It's very subtle, Joe, but I think I can anticipate.
Well, in the comics, the Penguin opens up the gates of the Arkham Asylum and he lets out the criminal, insane inmates who then come and run the city government and take it over. And you got Two-Face and the Riddler and the Joker and Poison Ivy. That's what I feel now. These people are nuts, completely unqualified, beyond extreme, criminal in many cases. And they're now being put in charge of the core national security pillars of the United States, things that liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans have labored for 70 years to create, not just in our country, but internationally, this global order that we've created. And they are out to destroy it. I mean, to switch comic books, it's like the Hulk, Trump smash. That's what this is their plan. This is what they intend to do, is to destroy what they consider the deep state. And that includes the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, the intelligence agencies, the FBI, the health agencies, our alliance systems. So this is grim. People warned about this, taking their own words, their own plans, and saying this is what they intend to do. Many people thought this was hyperbole. No, this couldn't possibly be right. People who voted in their wisdom, 76 million people voted for Trump, 3 million more than voted for Harris. And I don't think many of them actually thought that Trump was going to let RFK Jr. run wild on health. Well, he is. And, you and I have been in this town a long time. I don't think any of us saw Marco Rubio as the most statesmanlike of the potential nominees, a giant among these other people who aren't qualified to hold the jobs they currently hold, let alone run massive, complex bureaucracies that are central to American security. But that's what's about to happen.
Yeah, it is interesting as these began to roll out, the first two announcements on Walsh and then Rubio, and people are like, oh, this might not be so bad.
Right.
And then you have Fox News commentator Hegseth Green Beret, and I respect his service,
Check.
but with crusader tattoos and a history of sexist, misogynistic, racist views, who will be in charge of a 850, let's just call it what it is, $1 trillion budget for the Defense Department, responsible for millions of people in uniform, and guiding the most dangerous, most powerful weapons the world has ever created. And he's the person that's supposed to be the adult in the room, right? In the first Trump administration, we had we had substantive arguments with people like Jim Mattis, like John Bolton, like Robert O'Brien, National Security Advisor, but they were willing to inject some reality into the discussions. And I think now looking back, you realize they actually were able to slow roll and delay a number of very dangerous impulses by the president.
Right, and they had respect for the institutions. They didn't want to actually destroy the institutions. For example, the leadership of our military. These guys want to take down the generals who are currently leading our military. They want to kick women out of combat roles. Just get this straight. There are 200,000 women serving in the active military force of 1.4 million. Many of these women are in combat roles in frontline positions in Syria, for example. Hegseth wants to pull them out. You know what this is going to do to unit cohesion? You know what this is going to do to operations? And they don't care, because they are on this agenda, and this is what Trump has empowered them all to do. And we're just scratching the surface here. Forget what Huckabee is going to do for U.S.-Israel relations, how we're going to empower this ultra nationalist element in Netanyahu's cabinet to annex the West Bank, perhaps annex Gaza. Those Arab Americans who voted for Trump out of disdain for what Harris was doing with aid to Israel, I don't think they bargained on this. It's coming.
So there's one last element, and then we'll try to get back a little bit on topic. But I mean, this potential purge of senior military leaders, generals, right?
Yeah.
Hegseth has said General Cotton and General Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, they likely only got their jobs because they're black. Forget this guy flew 130 combat missions, is one of the most distinguished generals to hold the position.
He's a DEI hire.
Right, exactly. And that purge is not just part of decimating the professional military corps, but it also opens the door for something else that Trump has promised, which is using the military to go after domestic dissenters, protesters, and to enact large-scale deportations in this country.
Yes.
So, this is, it's hard to call it a coup when the leader has been elected, but we have elected an agent of chaos, to go back to another TV show, this time Get Smart, since chaos was the specter of its day. And he's now going to follow on these plans. Congress, I think, is likely to follow along. They have demonstrated fealty. They might duck and go into recess so he can appoint these people without having to put up for a vote. But those safeguards and bulwarks that were in place in the last administration or the last Trump administration, I greatly fear have been just decimated. So
yeah, I think one or two of these might not make it. Matt Gaetz looks unlikely because of his sexual exploitation of a minor.
I think it's called statutory rape.
Statutory rape.
But rapists are, we just elected one. So
will Tulsi Gabbard, a Putin surrogate, puppet, agent, will she actually be put in charge of intelligence? That might be, she doesn't have a base with the Republican Party, but the others, I don't see any reason why the rest of them won't be confirmed.
I'm gonna bet you lunch that they all get recess appointed. Gates
could be
and Gabbard.
Okay, so what's this going to mean for our area, for the nuclear realm?
So let me frame this for you, because there are two things I want to get into specifically.
Yeah.
The first is we've talked about this a lot. The United States is entering a new nuclear age, and the arms race is on. And Heritage Foundation and Project 2025 have written explicitly about the need to not just maintain the modernization program, which we've talked about, $550 to $70 billion a year for as long as the calendar can go, but to expand that, to accelerate it. So we're going to build new types of nuclear weapons. We're going to build a sea-launched cruise missile. We need to look at the resumption of nuclear testing. We need to be ready to threaten the use of battlefield nuclear weapons. So that whole element, what do you see in terms of the budget modernization and programmatic side for the American nuclear weapons force under Donald Trump?
Yeah, well, they laid it all out for us. And, the big picture of what's going on now is something we still have to understand. Jessica Matthews, our old boss at the Carnegie Endowment, has a wonderful piece in The Guardian this week, a long read, they call it, about the new arms race. W.J. Hennig at the New York Times wrote an excellent description of how much this is going to cost and where these weapons are being built in the New York Times just 2 weeks ago. Great pieces to go look at. Hennig, Matthews. But what exactly are they going to do? They have a 14-point plan. So they laid it out, and it begins with prioritizing nuclear weapons programs over all of the security programs. We're spending about $75 billion a year on nuclear weapons. Prioritize those, increase. They want to accelerate. This is step 2, accelerate the development and production of all the nuclear weapons. Reject any congressional efforts to find cost-effective alternatives.
Right.
That's their language. Reject that. Increase funding for the new warheads that are being done. Develop new nuclear weapons, including the nuclear-armed sea-launched cruise missiles, something that the administration hasn't requested, the Navy doesn't want. This has got, all by itself, tremendous implications, because suddenly you're going to be putting nuclear-armed cruise missiles on conventional attack subs, the Los Angeles-class subs. So that means every Los Angeles-class sub that we send to ports all around the world could have nuclear-armed weapons on it, which is going to cause tremendous problems for our allies. And plus, we might then end up putting these back on the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, et cetera, something we went away from in 1991 when George H.W. Bush denuclearized the surface fleet of the Navy. And they want to bring it back.
And every time an attack sub launches a cruise missile, our adversaries will not know whether that is a nuclear or conventional, because we will have both on board these submarines. There's simply no way for them to know.
Right. And we've done that. For example, we've had, attacks. Yes, this is not an uncommon occurrence.
It's the tool of choice. When Trump went after Syria, when Obama went after Syria, when we go after terrorist groups in Africa, we use cruise missiles launched from attack submarines.
So I'm not going to go through everything, but basically everything across the board in this vast nuclear complex that we have in America everything's going to be accelerated. Everything's going to be expanded. They want to roll back restrictions. For example, they want to unsign the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the treaty that bans nuclear weapons testing. This has been largely adhered to in the world. The only country that's tested a nuclear weapon in this century is North Korea. And even they, did it underground, at least, not an atmospheric test like we used to do. You do that, well, that's a gift to China. I mean, we've only conducted 50 nuclear tests. We've conducted over 1,000. We don't need to test anymore. But these guys want to develop new types of nuclear weapons. So they say, yes, we do. So we want to unsign the treaty. We want to prepare to resume nuclear testing and be ready to do it. Because again, they want to build new types of nuclear warheads. That's going to require testing. So that's another element that you'll see in the arms race. They want to dramatically accelerate all missile defense programs. None of these national missile defense programs, the ones that try to intercept long-range ballistic missiles, none of them work, but they want to accelerate them. They believe this is just a question of funding and will, and the rules of science and technology be damned. We can will this thing into existence. So that's just some of the things that they're doing. And then what can you expect? If they're going to do this, what can you expect to see happen? Well, again, they lay that out. The Heritage Foundation put out a brief on this to show how to do it. They want the president to give a major address to the country
right
on nuclear weapons, okay? And they want the director of the National Nuclear Security Administration, the people who build the weapons, create the material for our weapons. They want that person to be briefing the president every month with a plan of how we're ramping up, how we're doing, how we're going to go that. They want to put a special supplementary request in. So I would expect to see something like this in the first 100 days, boosting these various programs, boosting funding for them. And here's something to watch for. Tell me what you think about this, John. This is like the first operationalization of this. They want to increase the number of deployed nuclear warheads. So we still have a treaty, the New START treaty, that limits the United States and Russia to 1,550 deployed warheads. Russia stopped complying with that, but hasn't really broken the limit yet. They want to stop complying with the 2, but they want to break the limit. I wouldn't be surprised to see them order this is what they say, this is what Heritage says, to order our ballistic missile fleet, so 400 land-based ballistic missiles carrying one very large warhead. They want to see multiple warheads on each ICBM. So you go from 400 warheads to 800, 1,600, I don't know how many they have in mind. So, and have that all ready to go by 2026. It takes some time, but I can see an executive order that orders that puts all that in motion. They want to develop a road mobile version of the Sentinel missile under development, deeply in trouble, that program, years behind schedule, at least doubled in cost from what it was supposed to be, all kinds of problems with that. Forget that. We want to go ahead with a road mobile version, something you and I talked about last time. And that's just, again, a sample of the kinds of steps they've already thought out, they've already planned for, and they want to rush into practice in the first 100 days. So that's what I'd be looking for in January, February, March, April.
So I've had a number of discussions with the people who wrote the Heritage Report on this, and I've asked them, what are you trying to achieve by laying out? I talked to them, first of all, all these programs that we have in place now they're all behind schedule and over budget.
Yes, every single one.
So when you say do it faster and spend more, it doesn't matter. You don't have enough welders. You don't have enough industrial base. And, oh, by the way, you can't produce all of the shells and tanks and airplanes and other conventional things you want and do these things. So for example, the Sea Launched Cruise Missile won't be deployed for 15 years, so it doesn't really. But when I ask them, what are you trying to do? What is the outcome? Do you want to force Russia and China to the negotiating table to confirm? They're like, no. It has nothing to do with that. These are warfighting weapons.
Right.
This is to demonstrate. This is to show our resolve. Right. This will show the Russians and the Chinese that they can't threaten us. And it'll give us more options so that we can use nuclear weapons in conflict to destroy a Chinese invasion armada of China or to prevent Russia. And then I asked them, we deployed the B-61/12, the new modernized $25 billion tactical nuclear weapon in Europe, that was designed to deter Russia. Did it work? They're like, well, no, it didn't, but that's because we had, sort of weakness at the top. It's like, okay, well, the Trump administration deployed a new lower yield 76/2 submarine launch small yield weapon that could go deep into Russia to show them that they couldn't get away with threatening nuclear use. Did that work? Did Putin stop threatening nuclear use? Well, no, but that's because Biden was weak, and so when you ask them what are they actually trying to achieve here, it's all about what they see as strength and masculinity and power, and they cannot process that the person they've elected, their spokesperson for this, is a bully who has shown he will fold every time. He has said, I'm not going to defend Europe from Russia. Let Putin do whatever the hell he wants. And he has cast doubt that he would ever defend Taiwan against a China invasion. So this idea that they're going to be able to demonstrate masculinity and strength by pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into weapon systems while Trump is at the top, I think is not backed by any logic, and they're totally incapable of processing that piece. We've talked about this in the past. The message was right, but it was the wrong messenger, right? This was what happened under W and the regime change crowd and the neocons. Well, they just didn't go all the way, and they didn't have the resolve. And so I worry that this disconnect, giving the president, who it does not have the stability, in my view, and I would argue in your view, to be responsible for deciding when the United States might have to resort to the use of nuclear weapons, giving them more options is just downright dangerous.
Yes.
Now, I also feel kind of silly because to restrain this, I suggested that maybe the Secretary of Defense should be in the chain of command for the use of nuclear weapons. He's not currently. The president can simply call the military command center. I'm not sure that I had a Secretary of Defense Hegseth in mind for the constraining power. And so again, it's a sign that our institutions and our models and our norms are basically being stripped away as we speak. Let me ask you, Joe. So let's say for a second, as I suspect will happen, Trump will get his people and Congress will rubber stamp this enormous budget increase. How do you expect Russia, China, in particular, our main nuclear competitors, to respond in that environment?
Yeah. Well, insofar as there's a theory behind all this, it's expressed by Marshall Billingsley, the former Trump official in the first go-around, who says we will spend them into oblivion. So they will react by building up their own forces, but we're the stronger, richer power. We can beat them, going along with this myth that Ronald Reagan caused the collapse of the Soviet Union by his nuclear buildup in the 1980s. The truth is that they don't have to match us weapon for weapon. It doesn't take that many nuclear weapons to deter someone from attacking you. I expect China will now see that their buildup that they started several years ago in reaction to the U.S. buildup of anti-missile systems and modernization of the nuclear force. I expect that they will say, okay, yeah, we were right. We were right all along. We have to build up. I think Vladimir Putin has some interest in buildup. And as experts have shown out, you don't need new delivery vehicles really to increase the number of warheads. The warheads are relatively cheap, and you can just then put multiple warheads on different platforms. It's possible there could be some agreement between Putin and Trump. You're more optimistic about this, I think, than I am, where we don't put a new treaty in place, but there's some kind of agreement that we're going to cap it not at 1550, but maybe it's 2000, maybe it's 2500. And you could see that there's already some support for this in the United States. Just this week, we had an administration official say we have to be prepared to possibly increase our nuclear forces. So even in the Biden administration, there's been a sentiment for increasing. So we've been in a long, since 1988, decreasing steadily this mountain of nuclear weapons we built up. We've cut the arsenals by 88% from their Cold War peak. But now we're at an inflection point, an overused term, but an accurate one. Where do we keep decreasing or do we go up? Well, it looks pretty much like we're going to start going up again to some as yet determined new level. So I expect this arms race to take place in force. And here's the other element of this. This is not just a U.S., China, Russia contest. because of the policies and the attitude and the philosophy that the new Trump administration is bringing in, because of the instability of the president, because of the insanity of the people he's putting in charge of national security, our allies will lose confidence in U.S. national security leadership. No question about it. They're already appalled by what they see, and it's only day 8, right? Day 9 after the election. And so that means they're going to start considering their own security arrangements. Since the end of World War II, the United States has led the West in security. We built the alliance systems. We did the lion's share of the military budgets, the military fighting. We set the pace for our allies. Well, if we're going to abandon Ukraine to Russia, that poses an immediate threat to Europe, and they can outmatch Russia conventionally, but not with nuclear weapons. So they're going to have to start considering their nuclear forces developing, and there's already discussions in Germany about developing their own nuclear weapons. Same in Asia. 70% of the South Korean population already believes South Korea should develop its nuclear weapons. Are they going to have any confidence that the U.S. will honor its defense obligations? Same in Japan. So you could see a new wave of proliferation, not from adversaries like Iran, which is also a possibility, but from our allies. Yep. We'd be back in the situation of the 1950s and 60s when John F. Kennedy warned us if we didn't do serious arms control, we could be facing a world not with 4 nuclear powers, which is what we had in 1960, but 15, 25, 30. That's the world we're entering again.
So I want to park for a second, but I want to get back to the prospect of multiple allies going nuclear as the U.S. pulls back. And there's an interesting twist here, which I want to test out on you. But I want to get to this race that we're looking at, right? And I still have people tell me, "Oh, we're not racing. We're the only country not racing," is what people are saying.
Oh, yeah,
even though we're modernizing and preparing to expand, and now there are these proposals which will likely be implemented for us to grow the arsenal. This idea that we will spend anyone into oblivion when our defense budget's approaching $1 trillion. Mm-hmm. When our debt is exploding, right? Trump exploded the debt last time. I expect he's going to make money really cheap. He's going to spend money that's not his to make himself look good, fuel the market, cut taxes. That's all going to be borrowed money. The Chinese and the Russians don't have, as you said, don't have to match us. For every one that they build, the Trump administration thinks we need to build 2.
There you go.
Right? So each country only has to expand by 50%. We're the ones that are going to end up on having to run twice as fast and therefore burn out twice as quickly.
Right. The theory is that we need to be numerically matched with both Russia and China. So that's exactly right.
So, again, just trying to think through the logic. If you ask them to show their math, they say, well, but we don't need to do that forever, right? We don't need to match them forever. They ignore that politically they will be on a bent where we have to match the combined total. They say, well, our plan is just to have all of these new nuclear options. But in reality, we can already see that if Russia and China are going to build up, there will be this political pressure for the United States to be second to none in the nuclear field. And that's just the political reality. They'll, of course, say, well, that's not my fault. I don't control politics. But, you have to operate in the real world. I know, well, let me say, we used to operate in the real world. They don't operate in the real world because they're in a bit of a...
Right. And just to give you some scale of the U.S. buildup, we discussed last time on the podcast how we, the people who arguing for nuclear restraint, lost the debate. We lost. We ended up modernizing the force. Well, this is now modernization 2.0. This is not just replacing systems, which is extraordinarily expensive, but increasing them, adding new kinds of systems, adding new capabilities. So this is the debate we're in now, and I think we'll probably have lost that debate, but we'll see. Because it takes some time, right? But just to give you some idea of the scope, we're spending about $75 billion a year. The CBO estimate is that we're going to spend $750 billion on these weapons over the next decade, an average of $75 billion a year. The entire Reagan buildup, all 8 years of Ronald Reagan's buildup, when he built a new missile, 2 new bombers, new subs, new warheads, the total cost was about $75 billion. Right. What we're spending each year. And that, too, was instigated by a group of ideologues who believed that we were losing the war, the race to the Russians. They wrote a book, among books. This is the Committee on the Present Danger, Alerting America, and it reads like the Heritage Report does.
Right.
Same analysis, same crap, same, we have to build up our forces. And guess what? This is what Reagan did. He took this blueprint and he went and did it just the way the Heritage Foundation was involved in this as well, just like they're going to do now. So we've seen this movie before. They're replaying it. Here it goes. And here's one big difference is to the third part of the nuclear problem that we have to deal with, which is the stability of the president himself and his ability to launch nuclear weapons whenever he wants for whatever reason he wants.
So I'm going to end with that because, I like to depress people really, really a lot. and we're going to get to this fundamental challenge. But I want to talk about the Allies now for a second because I want to try this out on you. So just today, the White House is releasing the new nuclear employment guidance that was endorsed by President Biden. And it will reaffirm, as multiple presidents have before it, that we have nuclear weapons for three reasons. We have nuclear weapons to deter our adversaries from strategic attacks on the United States and our allies. We need nuclear weapons to reassure our allies. And we need nuclear weapons that, should deterrence fail, we need to limit the damage that our adversaries can do on the United States and our allies. Right? We need to counterforce target those weapons so that we can destroy as many of them as possible should deterrence break down. I think it's not polemical or ideological to say Donald Trump doesn't care about our allies. He is likely to. Ukraine is not an ally. They are a major non-NATO partner, but he's going to cut them loose. Russia is going to take over a third to a half of that country and neuter it. And he's basically going to reaffirm that, well, why should I protect our allies in Europe? Why should I protect our allies in South Korea? The people that are supporting a large-scale nuclear buildup think that they're doing it to reassure our allies. But the man at the top doesn't care about our allies. He may not be able to withdraw from NATO, although I actually think he will be able to withdraw from NATO if he wants, because Congress can't stop him. But he doesn't have to go to war to defend NATO allies, and no NATO ally, I think, will assume that he will. And so what are we spending all this money on? And I don't advocate for eliminating nuclear weapons to cut our allies loose, but if you've cut our allies loose, you no longer need to support parity to reassure our allies. You really still just need nuclear weapons to deter. And military past presidents have said you can do that at much lower levels. You could do that with 1,000 nuclear weapons. You don't need to match weapon for weapon. You just need to be able to hold at risk what Russia and China care about. And those are fixed targets. So there's this weird dynamic, which is we're racing in a context where the race is no longer relevant to the person in charge. Does that hold water?
I think that's exactly right. It really does undercut at least two of the major reasons that we say we have nuclear weapons. And I would go even a little further on, how many we need to deter. What does Putin value? Is it the Russian people? You could target a couple of banks in Zurich, and you might get at what he really cares about.
Which don't take nuclear weapons at all. That could be cyber hacking, right? You could just...
there's all kinds of ways to deter Putin if we really wanted to. We don't have to go to mass slaughter of innocent civilians who have nothing to do with Putin's decisions in order to deter him. Yeah, we could have the concept of minimum deterrence is completely valid. Several hundred could deter any foe or combination of foes.
I like to call it nuclear sufficiency because then, minimum sounds small, but sufficient is, but marketing is part of it. I don't expect any.
So the other thing about this is, a lot of this is not going to, what we're talking about, it's not going to be determined by anything that's in the guidance or in the papers. Trump is completely transactional. He doesn't care about any policy, about any country. He just cares about himself. As John Bolton says, he cannot distinguish between the national interest and his personal interest.
Well,
so the question is, well, what does he get for this? What does he get from the defense contractors? I mean this in a very particular way. Are the defense contractors going to be contributing to him in some way? Should he let Northrop Grumman go ahead with its ICBM program, which he authorized in the waning days of his administration? November, He was already defeated. That's when they authorized the new ICBM program. It's been a disaster, over budget, behind schedule. It may not be able to be built. I mean, there's all kinds of problems with this ICBM program that's a whole other show. But in order to let that go through, he's going to be making a deal with Northrop Grumman. This isn't going to be about the national interest or good
Joe,
management.
you're not cynical enough.
Oh, go ahead.
Imagine this and tell me if you think this is really unhinged. It may be. President Xi calls up Donald Trump and says, next year, I'm planning to take over Taiwan.
Oh, yeah.
But what I really want to talk to you about is opening up China to a chain of Trump hotels in Shanghai and Beijing. And I want to give you the exclusive license to be the hotel for foreigners in my country. But I can only do that once I repatriate Taiwan, which after all is Chinese territory and always has been. That seems like a pretty obvious yes from Donald Trump based on everything we've seen.
He's already said Taiwan is lost. He's already said that. Yeah, that's I mean, this is a transactional nature. And I'm not kidding about the references to the Penguin. I mean, this is a criminal enterprise. We saw it. We saw his son-in-law appointed to a high government position, waived the security clearance, right?
Right.
No vetting. Half of the appointees he's already announced couldn't survive a serious vetting. So he's just going to say, forget it. We're not going to do that anymore.
Bypass it.
And then Kushner walks out with $2 billion. $2 billion
Saudi money
for 4 years of work. You could call it that. Now that's just peanuts. That's now that you've seen what you can do. Now we have who? Elon Musk and Ramaswamy in charge of government officials. What's that about? That's going to be about enriching their pockets. These guys are all about, it's not about serving the American people. It's not making the government work for the American people. It's a racket. And they're going to be siphoning off as much money as possible. This is the gang that is now running America.
So let's really push people over the edge in terms of where our allies are. So if you're sitting in Poland,
yes,
or you're sitting in Seoul, and you see Russia or China across the sea or across the border, and you've been dependent psychologically and militarily on the United States to be your backer. I don't care how you think. You've got to be looking at your options. And for the Poles, there will be a strong tendency to look at Europe. They look at NATO. They're going to wonder whether France or Britain can provide a nuclear guarantee. Can they work with the Germans? By the way, their government's collapsing, to make sure that they have the conventional capability necessary. I don't know exactly how that's going to go. I think there's still but South Korea's got nobody to fall back on. And so you mentioned before your concerns that this is going to lead to the consideration of independent nuclear programs in these countries. So how do you look at, let's make a list together and let's project ahead, because you can't say Trump was an aberration. He's now been, seconded. This is who America is. This is what America has voted for. How many countries that are allies of the United States do you think will have nuclear weapons in a decade?
Okay, so we're not going to say this is going to happen, but it's because it's the tendencies. It's where they're going to go. Everybody's got to recalculate. History is filled with nations accommodating the greater power in the region and trying to make some deal so they're not completely conquered. South Korea has been conquered repeatedly by its larger neighbors, so they have 2,000-year history, more or less, of this. So they're going to be recalculating now. I'd be looking at Korea. I'd be looking at Japan, possibly Taiwan as a possibility in the Asia. I think that's it for Asia. I'd be looking at certainly Germany to do this. It's some possibility that NATO might decide that we can use the French and British, who already have nuclear arsenals, and that can become a Euro force. Of course, Britain is no longer in the EU, so that complicates it. But there's that possibility. Could Australia's constantly teased the idea? And if you're looking at Australia, you're in a very vulnerable position, and you've already pissed the Chinese off because the U.S. has started building bomber bases in Australia.
And we're jointly building submarines.
And we're, right, this has been an anti-China alliance, and Australia is all into it. And suddenly...
U.S. is like, I'm out.
Yeah, right. So Australia, could build nuclear weapons. They're sitting on a mountain of uranium there. So you could be looking at Australia. I would be looking at the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, both of which flirted with nuclear programs. Norway actually Sweden had a pretty advanced nuclear program.
Sweden had an advanced program.
Right? I mean, so these...
It's on our book.
It's in our book. It's in Deadly Arsenal.
It's out of print, but it's really good. Go to your library. And Joe and I look. The pictures on the back. Joe and I look exactly the same.
Exactly the same. Was that 30 years ago? Exactly the same. Right. So I'd be looking at the Scandinavian countries. In other words, the closer you are to Russia's border, the more serious you're going to get about nuclear weapons. Could Poland do it? I don't know. There'd be some, but I'd be looking at that as well. I don't think the Baltic states could do that. Let's see. Who've I missed?
I think you are overlooked in Baltics. They don't have a well-developed source of uranium or reactor production, but it's well within their financial and technical capabilities. As you recall, even in the 90s, there was a UN assessment that there were 44 countries that could build nuclear weapons if they made the political decision to do so.
Yeah.
That was well within their technical capability, and almost all of them were Europeans.
Yes,
so
that's right.
It is a choice. It is not a barrier or a hurdle. This technology is now 80 years old.
Right. I'm sorry. Then we go to the Middle East. So Saudi Arabia, almost certainly. UAE. That's probably it for the Middle East. And then, of course, Iran. And that's. I mean, I don't know. There's all kinds of possibilities with Iran. One is that you completely block with Israel, and you follow through on their regime change plans.
Right.
Get rid of the Palestinians, get rid of Syria. Regime change in Lebanon, and move on to Tehran, which a number of the appointees from Huckabee to Stefanik to et cetera are all in favor of that. But then you have this curious meeting yesterday.
Yeah, between Musk and the permanent rep in New York for Iran. Yeah.
For Iran. So what's that about? So, are there deals that could be made? Yeah, it's possible. Could you stop Iran from building a bomb if they really wanted to? You could delay them. But could you stop them? No country has ever been stopped from building a bomb when it really wanted to. They've been convinced not to do it. But forcibly stopped? No, we couldn't stop fucking North Korea from building a bomb. What makes you think you're going to stop Iran? So that's, and then you have to go to look to Africa and South America. I don't really see it, but of course, there were programs in Argentina and Brazil perfectly capable of developing it.
South Africa gave up nuclear weapons. They had 6. I don't really see them as a likely proliferant, but
Nigeria. I mean, Egypt flirted with the nuclear program. These are possibilities. And once it starts to spread, once your neighbors get the nuclear weapons, well, then that's a whole other level of threat for you. It's not just the geopolitical threat to the United States, et cetera. It's your neighbors, and you got to have some kind of either security or you're in a race for prestige. And you got domestic politics influencing all this. So we're back to the 1960s.
And this is what led sane people to look at the prospect of a world filled with nuclear weapons and alter trajectory.
Yeah.
To build alliances, right? The reason we have NATO is in large part to have deterred Soviet expansion, but it was also to prevent wide-scale proliferation of nuclear weapons to Germany and Sweden and Italy, who all had nuclear weapon designs and ambitions. Because in a world like that, the United States suffers.
Exactly right. So we started this program. It really began in earnest under Kennedy, but then followed through by Nixon and then Johnson and then Nixon to construct a world of rules and guidelines and security assurances, positive and negative, to prevent countries from building nuclear weapons and to try to stop the arms race between the two powers. And we call that the nuclear nonproliferation regime. And its great strength is that it's an interlocking system of networks and institutions of treaties and arrangements, export controls, etc. It's also its weakness. Because once you start pulling these things out, and that's what we've been doing for the last 20 years, the ABM Treaty, forget about it. The Agreed Framework with North America, forget about it. The INF Treaty, pull that out. The Outer Space Treaty, 57 years old treaty, now in danger of going by the wayside. New START, the last remaining treaty limiting U.S. and Russian nuclear weapons, expires in 2026. Zero prospect of it being extended, I would think. Once you take that out, well, then this is like the Jenga tower. It just takes one more piece, and it could be that New START treaty, and then you're threatening the core of the tower, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is based on the idea that those countries with nuclear weapons will get rid of them, and those that don't have nuclear weapons won't get them. Well, that whole bargain is shattered. And so you're back to the 1960s again, when we didn't have these rules, we didn't have these guardrails. And who's to blame? We are, because we're the ones who took it apart, thinking that we could spend everybody into oblivion, that we could dominate the world by military strength and political will. And that theory is now going to be tested once again, and once again, it's going to prove to be deeply flawed and deeply dangerous.
So the element of that bargain that has always been compelling to me is that if you let the world proliferate, you are assuming that every leader is going to get every nuclear decision right every time.
Oh, yes.
Right? So deterrence on a piece of paper seems to make sense, right? If you make a move that I don't like, I can destroy you and vice versa. But it assumes that everybody makes the right call, that they have enough information to judge the right thing, and that they have the intellect and the stability to be predictable, right? Trump has pushed since the 80s, since he pushed Richard Burt to be the nuclear negotiator for Reagan, the crazy man theory, right? That, I'll be the wild man and I'll get these guys. And we saw this on display with North Korea, right? That, the bloody nose theory, I'll just show them. We've had shows on this before. The only person who can order the use of nuclear weapons in the United States is the President of the United States. Everybody thinks wrongly that the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs has to verify the order. Does not. The Secretary of Defense has to communicate that order to the combatant commander. Does not. The Commander of Strategic Command would have to know about it and authorize it. Absolutely not. In the waning days of the first Trump administration, General Mark Milley, who's woke, and clearly will be brought back and court-martialed, as Trump has said, inserted himself in violation of the chain of command in the nuclear launch process by telling his military watch officers that any nuclear order had to be checked with him first, which is not part.
No,
so
illegal, not true. Can't
so
do it.
I don't even know how many days it is. I can't even count. But on January 20th, the president's going to be handed a laminated card with a code on it. And at any time, he can open that, pick up a phone, and order the use of nuclear weapons. And it raises this very dangerous prospect that a criminal with questionable mental stability, and who some have argued is no longer in command of his faculties, can order the nuclear use at any time.
Absolutely.
And it raises the question of whether or not the United States, the most powerful country in the world, can be trusted with a nuclear arsenal. And I've never in my life, I've been a nuclear skeptic my whole career. I've never once questioned whether or not the United States can be trusted with nuclear weapons. And I now worry.
I think that's exactly right. I wrote a very small piece for the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, along with 4 or 5, 6 other people who wrote. And my bottom line was, of all the threats we face, this is the most serious. And this is the one where, once again, Democrats are going to rue the day that they didn't do something about it when they had the chance. Even now, President Biden could decide that he's going to change the launch authority rules. It'd be an executive order. It could be overturned by the next president, but it's true. It would say that one person doesn't have the authority to launch these weapons. Like every other step in the nuclear launch command and control system, the bombers, the subs, the 2 keys that are required to launch our ICBMs, you're going to need at least 2 people Trump and somebody else to do it. That would at least put some barrier in there, even that other person is, oh, God help us, Pete Hegseth. But we've never changed it. We're living with this Cold War era policy that we no longer need. It's outdated, it's insane, and it may kill us all.
So once again, my prophetic title of "We're All Going to Die" cycles back. I apologize to all of our listeners that this has been among the darkest discussions that we've had, but Joe and I have been nuclear analysts for a long time, and the only thing I know how to do in a time like this is try to see things as clearly as I can and explain them. I'm going to speak for you, Joe. We desperately hope we're wrong.
Absolutely.
We desperately hope that the Senate leadership will recognize that there are real challenges with the individuals that have been nominated by the president, or maybe they themselves will recognize, God forbid, that they're not up to the challenge and decide to go do something else. But the most likely course is that we are going to be on an uncontrollable ride for the next 4 years. And at any time, things can go, I won't even say, sideways is not enough, south is not enough, literally could go thermonuclear.
Right. Our nuclear policy has always been insane. It's at its core, it's an insane policy that we have to depend on our security with the threat of mass extinction of the human population. But now, literally, insane people are in charge of that policy. You think I've been drinking water during this talk?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I can't drink the way I used to, Joe. But I think there is there's no silver lining to this conversation other than recognizing
it's
the world
rough.
we're in. Yeah.
And so, we got, like you say, we got to look it squarely in the face. We have to understand what it is, and we have to think very, very hard about what we could possibly do to minimize, if not prevent, these risks from realizing them, from being manifest.
Well, Joe, I know we're going to make it to at least January 20th. After that, we'll go week by week, but really appreciate you coming back on. We did not break and go behind a paywall for this conversation because I think it was something that was important enough for people to understand. But I do hope that our listeners will go to deepstateradio.com, that they will become members, they will support the podcasts. I don't think we're calling it the resistance anymore because I think there's a sense that, resistance requires some friction. I don't know what the handholds are, but I think there is a sense that to make sure we recognize we're not insane, that there are still people that are trying to think clearly about these challenges, that we want people to engage with us, and hope you'll come back. And Joe, hope you'll come back again sometime soon.
Thank you for having me, John. I hope you get to continue to broadcast.
Thanks, Joe. All right. Thanks all. Be well.